You're walking down a road at night. It's the year 1400, and you are deep in the rainforest of West Africa. Back in the Europe you've heard rumors about, a city street after dark is a black, dangerous thing. You'd carry a torch, you'd keep one hand on your purse, you'd pray. But not here. Here, the wide road ahead of you is lit. Tall metal lamps fed with palm oil burn along the roadside, throwing warm light across a street so clean and so straight it seems to have been drawn with a ruler. The houses on either side stand in neat rows, their walls smooth and shining, polished until they gleam like a mirror. Somewhere ahead, a drum is keeping time. You are not lost in some village. You are walking into one of the great cities of the world. This is Benin City, not the country Benin, that came much later, and took the name. This is the capital of the Kingdom of Benin, in what is now southern Nigeria. And in its golden age it was so large, so orderly, and so sophisticated that when Europeans finally saw it with their own eyes, they compared it, favorably, to the greatest cities back home. Some of them said it was cleaner than any city they had ever known. And here is the fact that should genuinely stop you. At its height, the earthwork walls that this kingdom built around its city and its heartland were, by some measurements, the largest man-made structure on the entire planet. Longer than the Great Wall of China. Not taller. Longer. Far longer. So here's the question that should amaze you. If there was a city in the African rainforest with lit streets running for miles behind the biggest earthworks humans have ever dug, a city an Englishman in 1400 would have found more impressive than London. Then why have you never heard of it? Why isn't it in the story we all got told about what a great city is and where they were built? The answer to that is its own dark chapter, and we'll get there. But first, let's build the city back up, brick by brick, and see just how extraordinary it really was. Let's get into it. Start with those walls, because they are almost impossible to believe. We are not talking about a single wall around a single town. We are talking about a vast network, a web of earthen ramparts and ditches that spread out across the kingdom, ring within ring, enclosing the city and then the settlements and farmland around it, boundary after boundary spilling out into the forest. Archaeologists who surveyed them in the 20th century came back with numbers that sound made up. The total length of all these connected earthworks, added together, has been estimated at around 16,000 kilometers. 16,000. They enclosed an area of several thousand square kilometers. One researcher calculated that building them would have taken 150 million hours of digging, and worked out that if you did the whole thing in one stretch, it was a bigger earth-moving job than the Great Pyramid. Think about what that actually means. There was no wheelbarrow, no excavator, no steel shovel bought at a store. This was dug by human hands and simple tools out of the earth of the forest over many generations, and it was organized. You do not accidentally dig a coordinated network of walls that stretches farther than the distance across an entire continent. That requires planning. It requires a state that can say to thousands of people over decades, here is where the wall goes, here is who digs, here is how deep, and have it done. The walls are not just big. They are a signature. They are proof, written into the ground itself, of a civilization with the organization to move the earth on a scale almost nobody else on earth had matched. The Guinness Book of Records, before satellite mapping got better, listed the Benin walls as the world's largest earthwork carried out prior to the mechanical era. Sit with that. Not the largest in Africa. The largest anywhere made by any people, before machines. Now walk back inside the walls, to the city itself, because the walls are only the frame. The picture inside is even better. The Europeans who reached Benin City did not go there to praise it. They were traders, and later, worse. But even they could not stop themselves from writing down what they saw, and their own words survive. A Dutchman named Olfert Dapper compiled descriptions in the 1600s. The city, he wrote, had a great broad main street, several times wider than a major street in Amsterdam, running straight as an arrow. Off of it branched dozens of other streets, laid out in order. The houses stood in a long row, close to one another, in good order, and they were big. The king's palace was a complex of squares and galleries and courtyards, some of them as large, one visitor said, as an entire town square back in Europe, with wooden pillars sheathed in cast bronze showing the deeds of kings and warriors. The homes impressed them just as much as the palace. The walls of Benin houses were made of a red earth, and the people polished them, rubbed them down until they shone so smoothly that the Europeans compared the surface to polished marble, to a mirror to plaster. The roofs were fitted, the rooms arranged around inner courtyards open to the sky to let in light and rain. The whole place was, in the words that keep coming up in these accounts, orderly, clean, governed. And that word, clean, is not a small thing. Remember when these men were writing. In the same centuries, the great cities of Europe were drowning in their own filth. Waste ran in the streets. Plague swept through crowded, stinking quarters. Sanitation, as we would understand it, barely existed. And these very same Europeans, coming from that, walked into a city in the West African rainforest and reported that it was cleaner, better ordered, and more pleasant than what they had left behind. One 19th century account marveled that the town was kept so clean you could compare it to the neatest cities in Holland. The people running Benin had solved, centuries early, problems that the visitors' own home cities had not. And then there is the light, the lamps. This is the detail that always seems to shock people the most. So let's be careful with it. In parts of Benin City, tall metal lamps were kept burning at night, fueled by palm oil, providing public light along the streets and around the palace. Public street lighting, the kind of thing we think of as a marvel of the modern gas-lit, then electric age, existed here, in a form, while medieval Europeans were still stumbling home in the dark. Now it wasn't a power grid. Let's not oversell it. But the point stands, and it is remarkable. This was a city organized enough and wealthy enough to light its own streets for the public good at a time when that idea had barely occurred to anyone. So we have the walls, the largest earthwork on earth. We have the layout, broad, straight, planned streets. We have the houses, big, ordered, polished till they gleamed. We have the sanitation, cleaner than the cities of the men describing it. And we have the lamps in the dark. Already this is one of the most impressive cities of its age anywhere in the world. But we still haven't talked about the thing Benin is most famous for. Because this kingdom didn't just build, it made art. And the art is what finally forced the world to pay attention. They are called the Benin Bronzes. For centuries, the guild artists of Benin, working under the direct patronage of the king, the Oba, produced metal castings of a quality that stands with the finest metalwork ever made by anyone, anywhere. Thousands of plaques, heads, figures, and ornaments, cast mostly in brass and bronze, using the lost wax technique, a fantastically difficult method where you sculpt the object in wax, encase it in clay, melt the wax out, and pour molten metal into the hollow. Get one step wrong, and the whole thing fails. The Benin casters did it again and again at scale for hundreds of years, producing portrait heads of dead kings and their mothers so lifelike, so refined, so perfectly proportioned that when they finally reached Europe, they detonated a crisis. Because here is what happened. In 1897, a British military expedition attacked and burned Benin City, looted the palace, and carried off thousands of these artworks. When the bronzes went on display and sale in Europe, the experts who examined them simply could not believe that Africans had made them. The craftsmanship was too fine. The realism was too advanced. It contradicted everything the racist science of the age had told them about who was capable of what. So they invented explanations. Maybe the Portuguese taught them. Maybe some lost European or ancient Mediterranean people had really made them. Maybe, one theory actually went, this was evidence of a lost tribe or a visiting civilization. Anything at all, rather than accept the obvious truth sitting right in front of them, that a West African kingdom, with its own artists, its own guilds, its own centuries-old tradition, had made some of the greatest sculpture in the history of the world, entirely on its own. That truth won eventually because the evidence was overwhelming. The Benin Bronzes are now understood for exactly what they are, a supreme achievement of world art on the level of anything produced in Renaissance Europe or ancient China, made by a sophisticated African state at the height of its power. Today they sit in the British Museum, in Berlin, in New York, in Oxford, scattered across the collections of the people who took them, while Nigeria continues to this day to demand them back. Those bronzes are the reason the art world could never fully erase Benin. They were simply too good to explain away. So now let's answer the hard question from the beginning. If Benin was this magnificent, the walls, the streets, the lamps, the bronzes, why did the story of great cities get told without it? Why did so many of us grow up learning about medieval London and medieval Paris and never once hearing the name Benin City? Part of the answer is that terrible night in 1897. When the British sacked the city, they didn't just take the art. They burned much of the city, exiled the Oba, and folded the kingdom into their empire. A living civilization was decapitated and its treasures scattered. And the people who did it had every reason afterward to tell a story in which what they had destroyed was primitive and small. Because if it wasn't, what did that make them? The myth of the dark continent, empty of cities and history, was not an accident. It was useful. It was a story that made conquest look like something other than the theft of an achievement. But the earth doesn't lie. The walls are still there. You can trace them in the ground on satellite maps, running for miles through the region around Benin City. The bronzes are still there, behind glass in foreign museums, impossible to dismiss. The European eyewitness accounts are still there in their own handwriting, praising a city they would soon help to destroy. The evidence for Benin was never actually missing. It was just left out of the story on purpose. And piece by piece, the historians and archaeologists and the descendants of Benin themselves have been putting it back. So go back one more time to that lit road at night in the year 1400. You are standing in a planned city, on a clean, straight street, under lamps that burn against the dark. Behind you, stretching for thousands of miles through the forest, is the largest thing human beings had ever built with their hands. In the workshops nearby, artists are casting metal into faces that will one day hang in the great museums of the world and force scholars to rewrite what they thought Africa was. Around you is a kingdom with a king, a court, guilds, laws, and centuries of history still ahead of it. This is not the edge of civilization. This is a center of it, one of many that Africa built and that the world was told to forget. The people of Benin didn't need anyone to discover them. They knew exactly who they were. They wrote it in bronze, and they dug it into the earth on a scale that outlasted the empire that tried to bury it. So why was Benin City bigger than medieval London? Because it was built by a civilization that we were taught, quite deliberately, not to see. And the walls it left behind are still the largest we have ever dug. A message from the forest written in earth that simply refuses to disappear. The lamps went out a long time ago, story lovers, but the road is still there. And now you know where it leads.